Actually, one of the things we could do is, how about we add another apple to this fetch quest? So there's gonna be 2 apples instead of 1. So let's do items only. There we go. We check our items list here. I'm just going to copy the name. Call this one Zara's Jack Apple 2. Oval Jack's other apple. And let's save this. So let's go back to the story editor. Of course, we're gonna have to have some more conditions on these things, since there's more than 1 apple now. So first off, this is gonna be easy. Let's change this one, add our other apple to it. Let's change the name while we're at it. And we'll have to generate definitions again. So we added a new global. Did I? Yes, it's global. And this is going to be the tricky part. So the way we could do this is we copy these things for both apples. You see they're in the list now. There's apple 2. There's apple 2. And then we change this dialog as well. Let's change this to them. Apples is when we made it, I believe. Yes. So we have has apple 2, which is another condition. So now we'll only get this node. We added another condition, so when you have the quest, you have the first apple, you have the second one. So when you add another condition here to our check, then we deliver the apples and it's completed. So did you find them yet? This one as well. Another condition here. So when you this one actually is going to be slightly different. We only want this node when you have the quest, and you don't have both apples. So as soon as you have 1 apple, you should still get this one. So we can't do this with the AND here, because that would mean if I have apple 1 and the normal has apple, this wouldn't be valid anymore and it would fail. So to do that, we'll have to make our check string a bit more complicated and make it an actual string. And we can actually put numbers on these things. So that's C1, C2, C3. And basically what we need is, if you have the quest, so not C1, and you either don't have this one or you don't have this one, you should get this one. So this here we'll have to change. So first off, we're gonna isolate these two here by putting parentheses around them. And this AND, what we have now basically is you have the Apple Quest and you don't have Apple 1 and you don't have Apple 2. But what we want is you don't have Apple 1 or you don't have Apple 2. So this AND will change into an OR, which is with this pipeline character here. So now, when you're missing either of the two apples and you have the quest, you'll get this line. So we save this, and note to use the parentheses like this, you need to use a string format and add the numbers to the C's, because it's too complicated otherwise to figure out what you want. So this one will only go through if you have both apples. This one, if either one is missing. So we have that now. We could check that in game. I'm gonna build. Hopefully no mistakes. You can tell our quest is getting a bit more complicated already. So let's try this in game now. Gonna hit escape again. So let's talk to him. So we got the quest. It's gonna say did you find them yet? Let's go get there. There are two apples. A wolf is gonna appear. Let's get rid of this wolf. There we go. Let's pick up one of the apples. Let's go check. So did you find him yet? If I switch to the other player, also did you find him yet? This is what we want. Let's go get the other apple. So if I talk with this guy, I still get did you find him yet? No. With my girl, oh good, you found him, thanks so much. So that's it. If I talk to him again, I don't have the option anymore. So it all seems to be working, but you can tell it's already starting to get complex now. So what would happen if you would add another apple? So let's go back to the story editor here. Let's hit escape, and let's see what's gonna happen then. So we are in the story editor again, and let's go ahead and add that third apple. So I'll have to copy this here. Change this to 3, change this to 3, change this to 3, change this to 3, and then here is our third line. Now we should go back to our dialogue, and that then checks for this third character event. But as you probably can tell, we're copy pasting a lot of script here, and every time you see something like this where the scripting is identical except for the item or the character or whatever it's talking about, you have a problem with maintenance. Because let's say, for example, I want to change the name of this event here. I'm gonna have to do it in a bunch of places, and it's very easy to make a typo here, or to just forget to change one of them, and then you have a bug in your script. So it would be nice if you could script this once and have this work for all our apples. So what we really want is a way to separate our logic, which is our scripting, and our data, which are our apples. So fortunately Osiris has some systems to do just that, and one of them and the most important one is called a database. Now, a database is pretty much like a folder where you can put things in. If you're familiar with databases like SQL or something, yeah, this will sound very familiar. So you can put things in those folders, in those databases. You can look inside them and see what's in there. And you can check if something is in a folder or not. Now, the way we define these folders is just by typing db underscore and a name. Let's call it Jack Apples. Let's make a little database for our apples. So our apples will be nicely grouped together in one folder. And you can actually name these databases whatever you want. You don't have to use a db underscore prefix here, but we just do that to make it clear that this is a database. So let's add our other apple here. So now we actually define a database db jack apples, and we put our apples in there. And if you remember, we have our dialogues line here to give the guy a dialogue. This also starts with db underscore, so this is in fact also a database, and this is a pretty advanced one. So I'll talk more about these advanced usages in later tutorials. But if you want, you can already look up in the story scripting how it works and what it does in the background. So we've actually already been using databases without knowing it. So now we have our database with our apples, and let's modify this here to work with all our apples, since it's a nice spot to do this. Now you see here that for every single apple that we have, we had to add a new line to this. So it would be nice if you could just ask Osiris, like, give me every apple that's in this db jack apples database, and move that to our demo character here. The way you can do that is by doing a database lookup. When Osiris has a rule like this if then part here, the then part is always going to execute with what's called a result set. Like Osiris is going to try and determine with what values it should run the then part. This will become clear in a bit. So when Osiris gets a message like this, it's going to try and see how many times do I need to do the then, and what values I need to do it. So if you just have the global event set here, there's actually only one result here, and that's going to be in our result set. And the result here actually is the underscore flag name that was passed by the game message as extra information. Now we filtered on it here already. We could have written this. Remember when we had an underscore here, like in the item added to character with a name? That means it's going to be the result that's filled in by Osiris. So if the global event set message comes in, the event will get the value of whatever was passed here. Now, on those result sets, you can refine them, so you either get 1 or 0 results or more, possibly. So we had our flag here like this. I'm going to copy this. You can actually manually filter on this as well, which is just a slightly different syntax than what you used before. The way you filter on result sets is by typing an and then putting your condition or your lookup in there. So what we're going to do is this, which is basically gonna tell Osiris, we come in here, we get a global event set. This is our result set. There's one result in there, namely the event name. And our restriction on the event name is that it should be Ozars demo delivered apples. And you do that, you compare strings with the equal bit here. You also have the not equal if you want this to happen for every event except that one. So every part of this if part here is pretty much like in the dialog designer. It's going to be evaluated to true or false, and it's going to be combined with an AND. There's no OR in Ozars, there's only the AND. And when all these things are evaluated to true, it then can execute on the results that were generated. So here, global event set is an event from code. It's automatically gonna evaluate as true. It's gonna generate one result, this one here. This bit here, this AND, is gonna evaluate to true if the event matches it. It's not gonna add more results or remove results, so we still have one result. So when we get to Ozars demo delivered apples event, we're left with one result, and this then part will execute one time for that one result. If we had more than one result, the then part would have been executed for every result. If we had 0 results, then the then part wouldn't be executed at all. So we want to do our database lookup here now, but first off I should go into a bit more detail about the result set I've been talking about. Now these result sets are actually tuples. A tuple, if you're not familiar with this concept, it's basically just a collection of items. It's just like a row. So Ozars is going to try and generate tuples of the variables in an if part here. And then for every tuple it generated, it's going to execute the then part. So let's, for example, take Notepad here. When we get this statement, if you have this if, what Ozars is going to do, it encounters a variable here. It's going to add this to our tuple list. So it's going to be like this. It's between parentheses to make clear it's a tuple. This statement doesn't declare new variables. It doesn't do lookups or anything like that. And it's going to just evaluate to true or false. And so our tuple is still going to be event. Then our then part is going to execute with this tuple, which is going to be event. So it's going to execute once. Now, if we add a database lookup, let me do this by adding another AND, taking the database name, and adding the variable apple here, things are going to change. So let's go back to Notepad here. And let's add this bit here at the bottom. Now, we introduced a new variable here. So Ozars is going to generate new tuples for this. Basically, when Ozars is going to encounter a new variable, it's going to take all the variables that were in the tuples before and try and make every single combination of those, every permutation, and generate new tuples based on that. So I'll make this more concrete. We have our jackapples database here, and there's 2 items in. There's jackapple 1 and 2 in there. So what Ozars is going to do, it's going to take the tuples and the variables and tuples it had before event and generate every possible combination. So it's going to create a tuple with this, with jackapple, and it's going to create one with jackapple 2. So the event here, since we filtered on it, would be delivered apples. So now we actually have 2 results in our set, 2 tuples in our result set. So our then is going to execute twice. Now, this is very important to remember, this expansion here in the tuples. because it's going to mean that sometimes your then part is going to execute more than once, which is probably going to be fine in most cases. It might create problems in others, so you always have to be wary of this. So let's take another example. Let's say we already had two tuples. We had an A. We had a tuple with two results in it already from before, and we do our lookup of our jack apples. Let's stick to the formatting we had here. What's going to happen is, again, there's two items in our jack apples database. Ozarus is going to expand this. Let's name this underscore A underscore B since they're variables. So Ozarus is going to create a tuple underscore A jack apple 2, and it's going to do the same for B. So this is really important to remember. If you had tuples before you do a database lookup, it's going to combine every variable in this tuple with this, so it's gonna expand your result set with several new rows. Again, if you had underneath this, you added another result or another tuples with one or more variables. Again, this will be added on top, and you're gonna have a bunch of new rows added to your result set. So you always have to be wary of that. So our lookup here generated these tuples since there was no restriction on it. And you can put restrictions on databases, like I could have put this. This is pretty much like the filtering we did here. So again, this will only return true, and it's going to generate a tuple with just the event here and this jack apple, and it's going to be executed once. So for now, this is what we want. We want it to be executed for every apple in a database. So we can change this here, this specific item, to our variable, since the value of this has been filled in by Osiris to be our apple. I hope this is clear. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to ask them in our forum, because this is important to understand. So that's the delivering part of it. So now, when this event is set, every apple in the database will be added to our demo character. Let's show another way actually of adding restrictions to these database lookups. Let's define another database. It's called DB Jack Apples in World, which is going to be our apples that are in the world. And let's add this as a restriction that we say, like, if this event is set, we're only going to deliver the apples that we picked up. So we add another restriction here, we add another AND. By the way, this is something I forgot to mention. This thing here, this lookup, will evaluate to true if there's anything in the database. If the database is empty, this would have been evaluated to false, and it then wouldn't have been executed. So anyway, so how can we do this? We want to tell Osiris to check if the apple is in this database and only do the rule if it's not in there. So we do this with the not keyword. So basically what this does is it's gonna go over the database, the Jack Apple's database, fill in the value in apple, and then do a lookup in this database and see if the apple is in there. Because now we added a restriction. With the not, so if this apple is actually in the database, this will return true. the not will make this false, so the then part would not be executed for this. But if the apple is not in this database, this will be evaluated to false, and the not will have made it evaluate to true. So note here that we filled in a value for, if we use the same name here, this is going to filter this is pretty much like before when we filled in a specific apple here on Jack Apple's database, but this time I'm using a variable. It means just give me the result back for this apple that we looked up here. So what we have now is, if we leave our databases like this, is that if the event is set delivered apples once, this is going to evaluate to true. We have one tuple with one element in there, one variable. This is going to be checked. If it's true, we're going to go on to this part. There's no restriction on apples, so it's going to return apple 1 and 2. Now we have two tuples, the event and the apple. Then we're going to evaluate for every tuple that was generated here. We're going to evaluate this bit, and we're going to say, is the apple that was fetched here in this part in this database, yes or no? If it is, we're not going to proceed. If it isn't, we're actually going to do the item to character call. So what does this look like if we add this to our database and visualize the tuples? So this is going to be okay for this line only, because for this line, this tuple here, the item Ozar's demo Jack Apple is actually in this database here. So this is going to evaluate to false, and the then will not be executed. It's going to evaluate to true for this item. This is going to be executed. Now let's add our second apple in here too, because the second apple also starts in the world, not in someone's pocket. So that pretty much takes care of the delivering of the apples. And now we have to keep track of picking them up. But first off, let's remove this line here, since we won't need it anymore. And let's remove this line too, because we're going to rewrite it to use our databases. And now we're going to get a little more involved. So I hope you guys can follow along. Let's save here first.